All right, my name is JD Fiscus. Today we're going to talk about what Ember and mobile can do together, specifically around Cordova. There's a package called ember-cordova. A little bit of background about myself, software engineering manager at Turnitin. We do indexing of papers to look for plagiarism, and then we also have writing tools. Before that, I actually did write code. I did full stack development. I've also written Cordova apps in the insurance industry, but I am an Ember noob. So this will kind of be how to get started. We're going to go through pretty much everything that's on the docs for ember-cordova, and then talk about some performance and things. So a little bit more about me. I'm from the Rust Belt, specifically from Detroit, so be nice. And my dog likes to party. So what's our problem? Our problem is that we love Ember and we want a mobile application. Either we are looking at this from a business aspect, we don't want to hire more developers. Either we don't want to learn a new language, maybe we want to go multiple platforms. But what are we going to sacrifice when we do that as a HTML, CSS web application? Because essentially what we're doing is we're wrapping our application in a web view of a device, right? So performance is huge. When you think about or hear mobile first, part of the reason for that is memory leaks. We don't really have that problem when we talk about the desktop because our performance, we don't have to worry about as much. So when we think about mobile first, think about like performance and writing really, really tight code so that you aren't going to hang anything up. The second thing that we need to watch out for is our UI, right? It's not going to be perfect compared to what the native application might be. That being said, it's still really awesome that we can wrap an HTML application, maybe use some of the services that we've written in Ember into our mobile app. So there actually is a difference between Cordova and PhoneGap. PhoneGap actually came first. It was purchased by Adobe. There was kind of like a huge uproar, and they open sourced Cordova under the Apache license. So if you think about Cordova, it's essentially like what WebKit is to Chrome, right? It's the engine of what the application's actually doing, whereas PhoneGap is more of like an enterprise type level application that you're going to focus on like analytics, deployment, and then have enterprise level solutions if you run into issues. And like I said, with Cordova, what it really is doing is it's taking the web view of a browser of the device and just wrapping your application. So there's two packages out there right now. There's ember-CLI Cordova, which is the former version, and then there's ember-cordova, which is essentially a fork from ember-CLI Cordova from the Isles of Code team. They actually have some really awesome videos too. I have some links at the end. Ember-cordova is version for Ember, it's 1.13 and up, but it definitely works well with 2, whereas CLI Cordova doesn't work well with 2 at all. So there are some prerequisites. Today we're going to focus mostly on iOS. So we need Node, NPM, Xcode, which is going to be our IAD, and how we run our simulator, and then Ember CLI. So the first thing is we're going to need to do is create an application. We can go ahead and do that through Ember's new. Then we need to install ember-cordova. I recommend using name and Cordova ID for the unique identifier. You're going to notice later on that name is actually what's going to print out on the icon of your device. So that's why I suggest it. For this talk, I actually also wrote a GitHub repository. So each section has all the code that you can check out to run it, build it, test it, break it. There are no tests, so you can yell at me later about that. The first step that you want to do is you want to go into your config in the environment and change your location type to hash. This is all native to Ember. What that means is you're taking the URL and there'll be a hash or a pound sign in the URL. And the reason for that is because Cordova actually interacts with the file system. This one totally bit me. It's a very small reference. You need to have relative paths in your index.html. If you put absolute paths, you'll get the white screen of death for like ever. And what that means is like when you first build an Ember project, you're going to have like the asset root URL in there. You just need to remove that. Once you do that, everything's fine. So here's where we're going to start using our first Cordova commands. You can use CDV. It's kind of like shorthand. You could actually write ember-cordova space and platform, and then it'll run just the same. And it's actually running the Cordova command. So even though they support certain ones and very specific ones, you could actually run anything. You can use any of their flags or anything like that. So when we add our platform, which is essentially our device, it's going to do two things. It's actually going to put things in our platforms folder, which is the three things that make up a Cordova project are platforms, plugins, and www. This config XML is essentially exactly what it sounds like, the configuration for everything. It's kind of like the brains of where it is. And it's also going to put in your engine that you're using. The reason that they don't use JSON is because Cordova is really old, and they just didn't have the JSON spec as like a standard at that point. You can add Android. Browser is experimental. You'll see later we're going to talk about events. The cool thing about browser that's new is you can run events that are specific to Cordova, like device ready, which is basically their hello world, which you couldn't do before. So that's actually pretty sweet. All right, so performance. We talked about web views. That's like the quintessential thing to Cordova and hybrid apps. I'm actually not using 0.3.0. I'm actually using 2.11, so I haven't actually tested this out. But they made a huge update, so you're no longer using the Cordova web view, you're actually using the native ones. So iOS, they started giving you a web view, I think it was like version 8. And Android uses a third party called Crosswalks, which is actually a third party application that was a competitor to Cordova, kind of. And then people just started including it in their package for better performance, and they just started doing it that way. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do our build. Ember Prepare is essentially like installing all your packages, all your plugins. If anything changes in that module, you're going to want to run this. It's kind of almost like a cleanup, I guess. Then Ember CDV build is going to actually compile everything for your platforms. You can specify if you want it to be iOS or Android or just do all of them. And then open is actually your IDE. So we'll go ahead and test this out. It's going to take a quick second. So this is doing two things. It's actually building your Ember product or package, and then you're actually building Cordova as well. Why are we taking forever? Okay, there we go. Oh man, that's way small. Probably can't see that too well, but right up here, you're going to see what type of simulator. I just use SE. They actually have an iPhone 7 if you want, but SE fits pretty well on the screen, so I'm going to use that. So we're going to go ahead and run it.
The Xcode simulator, Xcode IDE?
Mm-hmm. Well, the simulator is actually separate. You run it through through Xcode, but you can actually get an NPM package called iOS Sim, and then you can launch pretty much anything from there. Oh no, white screen of death. This is actually what it's supposed to do when you first start the project. So it's a little confusing. If you wanted to put something like in your index file, like testing, just to know that it was working, that's good. The reason for this though is because we didn't include any UI. ember-cordova has no UI stuff with it. It's just giving you the ability to build to native, right? So, there's also things called hooks. If you think of like any preprocessor, you can do things before build, after build, before prepare. If you wanted to manipulate like different parameters based on environments or something, this would be a perfect way to do that. Live reload is probably like one of the coolest features I think I've seen since I've been messing with Cordova and especially with the Ember side. And this is a good opportunity to use hooks, right? So where it says allow navigation to star or wildcard, you definitely don't want that in production. Basically, that's a huge security flaw If you leave it like that, you want to whitelist specific IP addresses. So we're going to do another demo, and we're just going to do serve. Oh, sorry. Where are we? So I'm going to check out to a different branch that has a bunch of templates, so we can actually see some fun stuff. I don't know if you guys can see that very well. So right here we have just a simple controller. We have our template, so we can put stuff out. And I just stole a bunch of CSS from my personal website. So now we're going to run ember-cdv serve, which is going to go ahead and do another build, and then serve up the browser as just like normal live reload in an Ember project. Okay, so we have our browser. Everything's looking awesome. If you notice now on Xcode, it's actually pointing to the IP address that you can hit. So if you were to pull out like your phone or even on your laptop right now, and you're connected to the network, you could actually pull this up and look at the screen. So we're going to run our simulator again. Stop tasks. Okay. We'll just change something. So not only did it update on the browser, but it actually updated the simulator, which is amazing. Because now I don't have to rebuild every single time if I'm doing something like changing my HTML, my CSS, any of the services, which is awesome. Now, you are going to want to rebuild, or at least do a prepare when you're adding plugins, things like that, because you really want to include it in the Xcode package, otherwise it won't work. So, but this will save you tons of time. So there's 4 main services that come with ember-cordova right now. There's Cordova. If you think of that, it's just their event system. Like I said, it's device ready, which is kind of like their hello world. There's Platform, which is kind of like, is this iOS? Give me the list of platforms being used, things like that. Keyboard, which is essentially just toggling the keyboard on and off. And then there's Splash Screen, which is kind of like that opening screen where you see the little robot-y guy. So we'll go through each one of those. I'm kind of going to couple these together based on code, and then we'll go through the demos. So here's all your events. Again, device ready, most common. What you're going to do is you're actually going to inject it through a service, and then you subscribe, which comes with Cordova, to that event. And whenever that event is fired, it'll execute code. In Platform, they actually don't have an example for Platform. So this is just something I put together. We're doing the same thing. We're injecting the service. This right here is a little different. You can see in the documentation, they'll actually tell you how to look up the particular type of service. They have plans to do all the core Cordova services, but these are the 4 main ones that they've gone through. So we're going to do the same thing. In this case, we're going to attach it to our model and then print it out in our template. Okay. So just so I can, do this really quickly. Each one of these tabs is just a different branch on the GitHub repo, and it's just so that I can kind of move fast. So with Platform, we're going to want to do another build, because we're actually including some of the Cordova core stuff. Take another second, or 5. This is why live reload is awesome. You don't actually have to open the, or maybe, yeah, you do. Never mind, sorry. Stop tasks. Open. Okay, so our index file's changed back to an actual build. We're going to go ahead and run it. Okay, so this alert that just got fired is the device ready. And we'll look at that code. Which one is that? Okay, so right here is our our event that's getting fired. Again, here's where we're injecting our service, and this is how we're putting things to our template. We've changed our template, so we're basically looking at the model, going through the platforms, and that's what gives us these platforms. So we're using WebView, Cordova, and iOS. So that's actually pulling from the platform service. Okay. All right, this is where we're going to start using some plugins. With the keyboard plugin, though, it's a little bit different. So you're actually going to do an Ember install, and what the -save is so that it actually puts it in your XML. So you can save it for later, and then it'll run whenever you're running prepare. That'll actually snag it from your config.xml. The weird thing or cool thing about keyboard is that it's actually pulling in an Ionic plugin, which is awesome because Ionic is Angular. So the fact that we can use two totally different frameworks, still have some core JavaScript that we can share between these two builds is pretty sweet. I don't know what else they can port from Ionic, but I hope they do. This is just copied straight from the docs. So the thing that's different, though, is we're actually going to use a component. And when the component is created, then we're going to go ahead and attach our keyboard events, and that'll interact with our Cordova service. So we'll do another build and demo. Sorry. Okay, we've got our event. Now we've attached this to, oh, I should have showed you, yeah, that was dumb, sorry. Pull up actually look at the component code. Can't see this. So all I did was just use Ember input and then passed a value. And then in our route, we're going to pass our group. And in our template, we're using our component right here. I just used the component in front of it just so that we knew that this was a special component. And then we're passing our target, which was our model group. And so keyboard comes up. And we have our bindings. So.
Do you have to pop up the keyboard manually in Cordova?
For some things you don't, but you can actually initiate it to come up if you want it to come up. So like if you were thinking about like maybe like an HTML editor or something that's not actually an input, you could essentially hit a div, open up the keyboard, and then start typing to fire the guns. Yeah.
Does like the iOS browser know what element you clicked on to always not like cover it with the keyboard?
No. And so most people think that the keyboard's actually going over the view. It's not. It's actually shrinking your view. So let's say you're styling something based on height, that would actually mess it up because your viewport is actually changing.
Is it the same for iOS and Android?
Honestly, I don't
feel like
know.
one works one way and the other works the other way.
Yeah,
For a while.
I don't know with Android. Okay, so on the splash screen, this is actually a Cordova plugin. So we're just going to use our Cordova command, cdv plugin add Cordova -- save. I linked to a generator because it's way easier than trying to make all these things the exact size. With the generator that I'm using, you basically need to put two icons where it can read it, or two files where you can read it, one for icon, one for splash. I just like putting it in the generate folder so that I know that those are things that are getting manipulated, but you don't have to put them there. You can put them wherever you want. What it'll do is it'll generate this folder for res icons, screens, and iOS. In this example, I'm only going to use the splash screen because ember-cordova actually has something called make icons, which is pretty awesome too. With this example, you're actually going to have to copy and paste the XML code into your config.xml. You don't actually need this service code in order to get the splash screen to come up in the beginning. If you want to think of like a splash screen as kind of like a loading screen, you could trigger a service and then say, okay, show my splash screen until that data is done processing, and then bring me back into a different view. So that's why you can add this service here. Okay. So for icon management, this is what I was saying, they have their own. It's actually a fork from another repo that I think they put out. But if you put an SVG icon in the ember-cordova folder, it'll go ahead and take a file, make it the icon, and put the XML in the particular platform that you need it in. And it'll do it for all of them at once if you want. So like if you want an Android or browser or iOS, all of them at the same time, which is pretty sweet. So I already generated all the icons because sometimes it takes a little bit. But what I will show is the splash screen code.
Where do you copy and paste into the config?
It would be in the platforms part. So let me pull that up. So right here. And then it's also putting the icons in there for you. So www plugins and platforms are all the things that you absolutely have to have a Cordova project. If for some reason you're ever running commands and it says something like Cordova raw does not recognize this as a Cordova project, it is because those three folders don't exist. So, I can't see. So here's our three services that we have in our route. The splash screen right here to hide and show before the model. Like I said, you could use that if you were loading data and just wanted to show essentially like a loading screen. And then let's just go ahead and build this. Come on. There we go. Okay. So you notice how this icon changed up at the top? That's basically because it's mapping from whatever your XML is. So we're going to go ahead and change, and let's get simulator. So now we have a new splash screen based on our logo. This is one just giant file, and then it just resizes based on what it needs. And our regular app, if we go to the home screen, we have our icon. So that kind of goes through pretty much everything that's in the docs. I just wanted to list some UI helpers that I think are pretty fantastic. Hammer.js is awesome for gestures if you haven't used it. Alex from Isle of Code has examples from his EmberComp talk that are pretty awesome. And their claim to fame is that they get rid of the 300 millisecond wait that you have when you hit click. Animate CSS, if you notice that circle was pulsing as an animation, that's what I'm using to do that. So the reason I like using Animate CSS is because it doesn't reflow every single time when you're trying to do an animation like you would in JavaScript. And what that means is like when you're adjusting like absolute and the right variables and you have something going across the screen, right? That's re-rendering the DOM every single time when you're using JavaScript. If you use CSS to do that animation and go across the screen, you're only doing it once by swapping out the class, which is super awesome for performance. Pure CSS, Ratchet, and Bootstrap, they're all UI component frameworks that are great for responsive stuff, so definitely suggest them. These are 3 development helpers. The top 2 are Cordova for iOS. They're basically an application that you could pull up, and then just like how Live Reload gives you that IP address, you'd put that IP address in the application, and you could use it as a physical device and test it that way. Ripple is it's a Apache project, and it's also a Chrome extension. So essentially it's giving you a whole bunch of devices that you can kind of load and then look at how your device would look on different devices that maybe aren't Android or iOS, or at least different Android devices, because there's tons of them. But it's not going to respond specifically with a lot of the Cordova events until the browser platform is actually fleshed out completely. So, here's some resources. So like I said, this is the example throughout the presentation. There's 7 different branches. You can go through, mess with them, do whatever you want. Contribute tests if you want. That'd be awesome. The ember-cordova is the docs. Ember screencasts, Jeffrey Biles, wherever he is. He's a huge help. He helped me start learning Ember, so the fact that he's here in Austin is great, a great resource. So Isles of Code, they'll do contracting and other freelance things if you want. And then this YouTube video is the one I mentioned about Alex from Isles of Code, where he talks about a lot of other things like memory links, performance, and Hammer.js. So, any questions? Cool. Yep. Either one.
The performance part of it.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen differences between running that web, view versus running something native?
So I actually haven't used. Oh.
Question for the audio, please.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, when talking about web views, how do you notice a difference between a native web view versus like a Cordova web view? Honestly, I had to take the word of the developers because I haven't used the 0.30. But the way they explain it, it makes sense. It's just how they, if you think about it's Cordova's actually rendering it, so it's like a third-party application versus like the actual native device is using its web view, it's just going to process it better. is my understanding. So, yeah.
So, is the idea that you always have like a separate standalone project for this native app, or might you be able to also mix in a classical web application in the same code base with like, I don't know, if we use like conditionals or whatever? Or
Yeah, great question. So the question is, can you actually have like a mixed project? For instance, if you had a desktop project and a mobile project, would you use conditionals, or what type of technology could you use to either render one in like the same GitHub repo, right? Okay, so you absolutely can. There's a couple different plugins, and I wish I remembered the name of one. There's one where you can actually tell it which files to build and which ones not to build. Otherwise, you can just build all of them, right? If you're the one that's defining how your view is going to look based on responsiveness, so if you wanted to use like responsive and just say, under this size of the media query, turn off everything that I don't want to see. Now, obviously, that's not as performant, right? Because you're still putting it in the DOM, but that is one way to do it. It also kind of depends on how big your project is, right? Like, if you had a massive desktop app, you might not want to port all of that over to your mobile app, but maybe like your services you did. So you could do like a private NPM repository and push all those services up and just pull them down through NPM install would be another way to do it. Any other questions?
We got time for one more.
Okay.
Is it possible to access some of the native features of the phone with Cordova, like
Yeah.
photos or pictures, or, I don't know, microphone?
Yeah, sorry, I definitely should have mentioned that. So, oh, there we go. So right here where you're seeing like the Cordova plugin splash screen, this is actually from the native code. So if you wanted to use something like camera, you could do Cordova camera and install that plugin and then use it the same way. You can also use PhoneGap plugins, right? They're the same engine underneath, so it doesn't matter either way. So.
We can do one more fast one.
I was just going to ask if there was anything that you felt like was missing from the experience of building like a real native app. Are there any big gaps left still, or?
Definitely UI, right? Like you're not going to have the native UI as you would with a native app. There's a little bit of a response time lag. Other than that, I don't really think so. Like, so a great example is LinkedIn's mobile app is actually written in Ember. So I mean, you can make it whatever you want to make it. It just kind of depends on if you have to have like that mobile first mentality, right? Otherwise, it'll definitely kind of blow up. So. Cool. If anyone has any questions, I'll be around. Just snag me afterwards.